Welcome to this training on the overview of person-centered service planning and practices for case managers and service coordinators. This is sponsored by the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. This is an important topic because person-centered practices help us think differently about the way we engage with people that we support. We remember that disability is a natural part of the human experience. Disability is an experience that our family members have. We might have friends who experience a disability. We might have neighbors who experience a disability. We might have gone to school with someone who has a disability. If we live a long enough life, we acquire a disability. So it's a natural part of who we all are. Also, receiving support, being in relationship where we are giving support to each other is a natural part of the human experience. So this helps us think differently about the people we support in our process of really building whole communities. That's what this is all about. And making sure that everyone has an opportunity to contribute so we can all benefit. And when we're providing customized support or personalized support, it means that the person is the source of information. So we need to listen to them. We need to listen with an intent to understand, listen with an intent to learn what's unique about them, how, when, why, and where they want to get support. And so that we are listening with our ears, we're also listening with our eyes and with our heart to understand all of the different ways that we all communicate with each other about how support can be provided and how that changes over the course of our life. We also recognize fundamentally that in order to be in communities where we are in relationships of belonging, we are thinking about how we're sharing our gifts with each other, our strengths, our talents. So our focus in person-centered practices is on strengths, not deficits. We're thinking about what others can contribute to others, what we can appreciate in gifts, like and admire about each other, and how that can form the basis for good relationships. We also know that there are certain people that we want to support in a person-centered way that might act in a way that's disturbing or challenging to others. So our question is, what is that behavior telling us? Can we learn anything about potentially unmet needs? Is that a source of information? Also, we want to ask a question, think about it differently and say, what would need to be taking course in our own life experience in order for us to act in exactly the same way? We all have the capability of acting in a way that's challenging others. What are insights we can draw that might give us an understanding of what's going on in this person's life and how we might be able to approach them in a new way? So fundamentally, it's about respect for people. It's respect for each other and how we can engage and be involved in relationships that reinforce the capacities of people. The funding source for all of our services in the community is Medicaid. It's Medicaid funding that supports long-term supports and services, the Medicaid funding that comes from the person's eligibility for this source of health insurance. And the form of Medicaid that's specifically directed towards long-term supports and services is called home and community-based services, or HCBS funding. And that HCBS funding has been a solid foundation for us over time, and also comes with certain regulations and rules. So the federal government establishes certain requirements so that we all have a common understanding and appreciation of what community really means and what home really means. And there were some great updates that occurred with the rulemaking entity under the Medicaid funding, which is the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, or CMS. They updated the rules in 2014 to really be more clear about what home means. It's the same definition that we all have, or what community means. It's what we all experience as community. So the most updated rule occurred in 2014. We refer to that updated rule as the settings rule. And so with regard to the requirements around how people experience life when they're being supported through services funded through HCBS services, means that homes are places where you and I experience life in a way in which if we're hungry, we eat, we have access to food. We choose where we live from a variety of desirable options. We're going to be supported by a provider. We choose that provider, again, from options, desirable options. We have a role in the process of deciding who lives with us. That's something that we all experience and recognize as home. We also visit with people that are important to us in our lives, when and where we want. Our belongings, we secure them under lock and key. But also with regard to how services are arranged, in your role as a service coordinator or case manager, is to recognize the person has control over organizing those services, that planning process. Your role is to support them at the level they need. Some people need a lot of assistance. Some people need less. It changes over time as we become more confident and capable. So we're always testing and asking the question, what support do you need in all things, and particularly in your role as a case manager or service coordinator? There are a variety of different techniques that have been perfected over time. They've been around for many years. Strategies to do person-centered support, person-centered planning, which is really a whole life process. We apply some of those principles to our service planning process when we're creating the individual service agreement or the care plan. But these are strategies that can be used for someone's entire life, where people are enrolled, brought together in a circle of support to assist the person in better understanding and realizing their desire for a preferred future, a good life for themselves going forward. So on this slide, you can see some different lists of those. One is MAPS, making action plan. Another one is PATH, planning alternative tomorrows for hope. These are nice graphic techniques. A lot of the time our creative energies are activated by visual designs and drawings and so on. So these are wonderful ways of drawing a preferred future, a North Star, what we see as a good life going forward, and helping people imagine who needs to be there, who would be there, what would they be doing, what does it sound like, what does it feel like. So MAPS and PATH are great sources of some tools, some strategies. Essential lifestyle planning is another methodology. That's one where you use different kind of techniques to figure out and verify and update your knowledge of what's important to a person, what's important for them. Those things change all the time. That's a methodology that's actually a core original foundation for person-centered thinking, which is a training methodology to learn more about important to and for and techniques for that, capturing that learning and sharing it with others. There's also personal futures planning, and there's charting the life course, which is a set of principles that come together as a result of conversations with families and their loved ones that help them think through what good support looks like and how to think about imagining a preferred future, what you want to avoid, and how your life experiences impact and help you design next steps to move forward towards your good life. So these are all techniques that are good to learn. You can use them in combinations that are customized to the person that you're engaged with. We're not going to cover those in detail, but we're going to cover some common principles. All of these versions have some common principles. So let's take a look at some three that we would like to concentrate on today. The first principle is that quality of life is defined by the person who lives it. They are the source. If we're going to support them and experience a quality of life, then they are our teachers. Individualized, customized support means learning from the person on a continuous basis and looking at a variety of sources for that information and recognizing that that gets updated on a regular basis. Why? Because our imagination of what quality of life really is, will really change in different phases of our lives and based on our experiences. The second principle is the importance of supporting people with dignity and empowering them. It's critical for all of us that we have lives of dignity, right, where that's preserved. Nothing about the supports that we offer should be compromising that in any way. And also, a full life, a meaningful life, is one in which we have choice and control. So we need to maximize that and always make sure that we're not putting roadblocks there. So it's important to provide that support in that way. That's the second principle. The third principle we're going to talk about is nothing about me without me. The importance that when decisions are being made, when we're organizing supports, even when we're making decisions about program design, policies, and practices, the people who are impacted need to be at the table. And as a case manager or service coordinator, that's critical to keep in mind as you're working in partnership with the person, co-planning, co-developing the individual service agreement and care plan. They must be engaged directly. There's no working around that. It's nothing about me without me. Let's take a look at that first principle. Every person is an expert on themselves. You are an expert on you. So it's not easy to simply say, what is your quality of life? What is your definition of that? That's an abstract principle or question, really. So we need to get good at, develop different techniques and strategies, different questions to ask, holding the question, creating an opportunity to have that conversation with the person, also having conversations, getting permission from them to talk with other people that is important in their life, having those conversations and returning to it, because oftentimes it requires sort of a contemplation and a careful thought process to really understand what that is. So going back to it, understanding what quality of life really means for the person, we discover it by asking questions. So we're engaged in what we refer to as a discovery process. It's continual. We are always curious about the answer to this question. We're listening to the answer. We're listening to understand. We're listening to learn. We're listening with the understanding that we may not know. We're not experts. You're the expert on your life. I'm going to learn from you. I'm going to listen with the idea that I might be surprised. I might be wrong. And I'm always curious about knowing more. So discovery process or discovery practice is a continuous aspect of your role as a service coordinator and case manager. We also recognize, we talk about this in person-centered thinking, as a sequence where we are forming assumptions in our head, right? We're making guesses in our head of our current understanding of what's most important to a person, what their idea of a quality of life is. And then we're going through a second step. We're guessing, then we're asking, we're inquiring, we're validating, and then we're writing down. So we're never writing down and acting before we take the step of validating or verifying. And making sure that we're always intentionally going through those three steps. Always remember that quality of life definition continuously changes as people change. So let's take a look at the second principle, the importance of supporting people with dignity, preserving their dignity, and making sure that they have power. It's a relationship that we have that reflects power with, not power over. So we are working in partnership. It's co-development. We're always thinking about in the different support strategies that a person experiences, but also in our relationship with them as case managers or service coordinators, that we're creating opportunities for choice, that there's opportunities for independence. So when support is provided, it's just enough support. And also the flow of activities, the schedules that happen, how weekends occur, how morning routines occur, and so on. There's opportunities for decision-making and choices. We often make assumptions that a person likes this, or this is the way they always do it, or this is our practice, or this is our habits. but there might be opportunities for a person to actually decide to do something differently. So we should create intentional moments of pausing and asking what they want to do next. And also making sure that what we are doing is just enough support. So we think about different kind of roles that support providers can take. And this is reflected in what we do as case managers or service coordinators, but it's also what we want to look out for as we're seeing different support arrangements coming together on behalf of a person. So there are different kind of roles that kind of come forward, kind of emerge when we see practices of support. There are some roles that tend to dominate, and we've all participated in them, that I would call being a caregiver. People like offering caregiving to each other. It's sometimes often seen as and felt like, as you're taking the role as a caregiver, of being nice to somebody, caring for them, showing you're caring. But oftentimes that's meeting an internal need rather than really supporting a person which in a way that preserves their dignity and power. So we see situations where someone sets the table and prepares food, or touches up a bed and makes sure that their bedroom is all tidied up and so on. We do things for people in a way that really meets our own needs to feel like we're good caregivers and also feel like we're in an orderly environment ourselves. And we forget about how that might be robbing somebody of an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to develop new skills, or simply an opportunity to have control, right? And to say, that's mine, that's the way it is, this is my life, and not see somebody coming in, tidying it up and checking and correct things, or doing things for them. So even, with a good-natured caregiver role of, I'm going to make sure that when people come back from their trip, they're going to have some nice snacks, and I'm going to set the table and everything will be beautiful. Actually saying it might take longer if people are involved themselves, but it's an opportunity for them to have choice and control. So caregiver role, sometimes what we want to see, people respond to receiving caregiving as kind of tolerating. Oh, they're just trying to be nice to me. But in the end, they're not experiencing a life of dignity and control and power. You'll also see something else sometimes. And again, we can slip into this as a case manager or service coordinator. We're really kind of directing, as we become more confident and feel stronger about our managerial skills, we end up being more of a directors, or I'd have to say almost drill sergeants, right? Where the schedule of the day is, we've got to make sure we finish up dinner by 1 o'clock because we got to get out to the car by 1:30 because we have that 3:30 meeting and blah, blah, blah. And we keep on going in the sequence. And we end up doing things like, hey, okay, everybody, make sure you wash your hands. Everyone get into the car. All right, everyone buckle up. And then that moves into situations where if somebody is being supported in a public setting, like purchasing an item at Irving gas station or CVS, where the support provider is actually giving cues like, say you're sorry, or excuse me, or say thank you. And they're getting cues in this kind of drill sergeant kind of way, again, that robs them of their dignity, right? Infantilizes them, really shows other people, sends signals to other people in the public that this person is getting support or treatment or care, and they're really diminished, and it blocks their ability to have good relationships in the community. So we don't want drill sergeants to show up. What we really want to see is good support to a person in a way that reflects coaching, or another term that's used is active support. That's where we are intentionally thinking about supporting a person in a way that's just enough support, so they're being maximal independence is experienced. Also, doing things like when that somebody is needing to learn how to do something that you're practicing it beforehand, role playing perhaps, preparing, thinking about how to provide cues in subtle ways, maybe cueing and support from a distance, and also reflecting afterwards, debriefing and talking about what somebody just experienced, and we can learn from our experiences. This is all active support. This is all a coaching strategy. This is the approach we want to take as service coordinators and case managers. But also we want to be on the lookout for this when we're knowing that people are being supported in different strategies. Is that support really being provided in a way that maximizes dignity and really empowers them? The third principle is nothing about me without me. You might have heard this before. So what is your duty as a case manager to make sure this is a reality? Well, the person leads the person-centered planning process, right? They're the ones, that's in the settings rule, but it's also in a standard of practice that's person-centered. So the question in your mind is always, how much support do they want? What can they do on their own? We start with that strength-based approach. What are they capable of doing that really can be applied in a person-centered planning process, whether it's the meeting itself or how information is gathered to go into the individual service agreement and care plan? What can they do by themselves, and where do I kick in to start providing support? And remembering that over time, those skills will be strengthened, right? And so the level of support will evolve over time. Each time you do it, it'll be in a different way, different strategies, moving away from just assuming, right? You're guessing and you're providing just enough support so that they're driving the process themselves. So the person will lead the person-centered planning process. You provide the role that they want and the support they want and need to be successful. I mean, that's the outcome. So maybe they want a co-chair kind of role, right? You're doing that in partnership with them. But the meeting, when you're having the formal meeting, you're planning a individual service agreement planning meeting or a care planning meeting. It happens when and where the person wants, where it's most convenient to them. Other people accommodate them so that they feel control, right? It might be on a Saturday. That might be easiest for them in terms of their schedule or in terms of their energy or feeling more comfortable. Happens at their convenience and their desire. But also where. Meetings don't have to be in rooms inside. They can be outside. Should the windows be open? Should they be closed? Should there be music happening? Should it be good lighting? Should it be subdued lighting? Should we make sure that there's no extraneous sounds? Door opens, door closed, standing, sitting down. A lot of these processes can be in combination, right? Whatever fits and maps onto who the person is and what they're most comfortable doing is that's the lead. That's what you're listening for, and you're going to follow their lead as to how they do that. Also, remember that they share information in a way that they want and feel most comfortable with. Also, the plan itself, once it comes together, they're approving their own plan, right? They're approving their individual service agreement. Even if they have some other supports in reviewing and approving it, it has to be in a format that they understand. So it has to be presented to them in a way that if they really don't do a lot of reading and need enhancements with pictures or that sort of thing, or even with videos, that's how the service plan is actually put together. So they can really understand what's coming together on their behalf. And driving this process of nothing about me without me means also it's a continuous question. You're always looking at satisfaction for services, right? We know that there's that quarterly satisfaction survey, but it's beyond that. It's continually wanting to know, are they satisfied with what's going on? And doing that guess, ask, write sequence, I'm seeing some indications that this is how you're experiencing this. Am I correct? What's working for you here? What's not working? And let's get to the bottom of that, because fundamentally we're going to be developing and changing supports based on input from the person. And more to this point about nothing about me without me, making sure that the person is really driving the person-centered planning process requires that we're continually listening, right, to them and understanding what their preferences are. And we know that people communicate, all of us communicate in different ways. So there are a lot of legitimate ways that somebody communicates how they're feeling, what they prefer, what yes means, what no means. So we communicate with words, we communicate with how we conduct ourselves in an environment, right? How we move through the environment. That means a different thing if you're moving fast or slow, or if you're rocking back and forth. Facial expressions, eye blinks, gestures, vocalizations, movements. You know who really gets great at this is direct support staff, right? Critical information that is valid and legitimate about how this person communicates. And if we are doing person-centered practices broadly, we are learning from the person. They are a teacher, we are a student. They're teaching us how they communicate, what their preferences are, what their vision of their good life is on a continuous basis. We're learning about that, but we need to be good students. We need to write that information down in a way that can be shared with others, right? Being a good student isn't a practice where we force that person to teach each one of us over and over again. Staff changes, they've got to teach us again, right? And our learning has to start from zero. We should be collecting that information on a regular basis and sharing it with each other. That's person-centered practices. Also, as a case manager, you want to turn to direct support staff to really learn about that. How do you learn about preferences? What are indications the person is happy? They'd like to do so. What does yes mean? What does no look like? So we want to figure that all out so that we can understand more broadly what likes and preferences are. We also want to check with multiple sources because we communicate different things to different people in our lives. You know, even think about your siblings. You'll tell something, you're sharing some aspect of your life with your sister than differently than what you would share with your brother. You might even give different kind of indications, right? So it's a mosaic. You need to get a little bit different sources. It's not unusual for people to have different impressions. They're learning different things about the person. Pulling that together, you know, you're a champion for the person. You're learning things as a service coordinator or a case manager. It helps you pull that all together and learn and accumulate that information over time. In continuous process of discovery, you're making guesses based on what you're learning, you're asking and validating, and then that's coming together in a written format in the individual service agreement or care plan. So you're learning about those preferences. What does yes mean? What does no mean? Sometimes you certainly want to ask the person themselves, right? When you're not understanding, turning to them and say, show me this, show me that. Sometimes people can show you what they mean easier than telling you. So turning them and asking them to show you is a valid and good way of getting clarity as well. So we are always, always, always meeting with the person directly in the process and the buildup and the workflow as you proceed to developing a new individual service agreement or care plan or updating one. You're always meeting with the person directly before the individual service agreement or care plan meeting. And you're having conversations, you're scheduling an opportunity, and you're thinking about, I've got some things that I want to learn. I want to get an update on. I'm going to share my impressions. I'm going to see whether it's correct, right? You're involved in that discovery process. You're having conversations. Initially, they can be very informal, just collecting information and solidifying over time. What are you learning about? You're learning about their skills and their gifts or their new things that they're learning. What do people like and admire about this person? What are their passions? What are the new talents? What are the new things they're learning? That is new places, new foundations or baselines to work from as they learn new skills or do new things they want to accomplish to move towards their good life. What are their hopes and dreams for the future? We'll talk in a minute about the different ways to tap into that. Hopes and dreams are sometimes easy for us to talk about, but sometimes We need other ways to sort of get at what hopes and dreams really mean. We're going to be brainstorming what do you want to do this coming year? Is there something new that you want to make sure happens this summer or this fall or this winter or spring? What are you thinking about doing in the future that you'd really like to do? That could be an open-ended question. You can explore it that way. The person is guided also determining who should be part of their team, who's going to be the people around the table or in the room when you're having that meeting. They get to determine who that will be and who will not be there. Another level of control, choice and control. Because we all have different constellation of people we want to weigh in on supporting us or thinking about what we want to do, right? And think about different phases of our lives. When we were very young, mom and dad were pretty important, likely, or an auntie or an uncle. There were people that were really good advisors. Get older, you be a young adult, you're sometimes pushing that away and bringing in peers, right? Other people that is more of your social circle, but people that you really trust as an advisor, they choose. And having that choice, being disinvited is not a negative. It's not an indication of, oh, that's a bad person. It's actually a point of celebration, right? We're listening to that. If you're activating that as a case manager or care coordinator or service coordinator, you are really reinforcing their capacity for control, their experience of control and dignity in their lives. That's a point of celebration if you're hearing, oh, that person is not going to be there. Okay. That doesn't mean you may provide advice as they have good information we'd like to get, and you can tap into them and help in that coordination process. So they can contribute they can be valid and important sources of information to build a good ISA or a good care plan. But if the person doesn't want them at the meeting, they don't come to the meeting. As you're listening and having a sequence of engagements with the person, these meaningful conversations, right, about these important questions, you're going to be formulating an idea of what the different outcomes are that are attached with that vision of a good life. So this is my dream or hope for the future that involves or requires certain outcomes, broader statements. And so there are goals associated with those outcomes. And you're getting a general idea in initial conversation, but you know that eventually you're going to have to operationally define them, right? You're going to have some very specific descriptions so that anybody who's reading it or looking at it understands who's involved, who's providing the support, how they're providing support, right? That incorporates strategies that the person prefers in terms of how they're learning, how they learn best, or how they're supported best. So anyone can understand what that is, but you also how it's provided, how often that support is provided, when it's provided, who's providing it. Also, how it will be recorded and how progress will be noted and how often it's going to be reviewed and updated. All of those are built into those operationally defined goals. So you're eventually going to get there, but you have a workflow that starts with informal conversations and builds up so that you're putting all those elements into the plan. So you're including information that taps into some core concepts. You want to learn what's important to a person and what's important for them. Those are very unique for every person. And it changes over time. But we want to make sure that what's important to a person is understood because that needs to be present in their life. They need to have access to, we all need to have access to what's important to us in our lives. It needs to be present. So during phases of our lives, where we are doing transition or important decisions are made about next steps or whatever, that important to is taken into consideration, as well as important for. But let's talk about important to. What is important to a person? It's those things in life which help the person be satisfied, content, comforted, fulfilled, and happy. Right? And that's very unique to each one of us. How do you feel comforted when you're not feeling well? What's your unique way? Some people like to wrap themselves in a blanket, pull the shades down, put the headphones on, listen to music, and just zone out so that they can get better and feel sort of more settled. Other people like to run, get exercise, or do some activity, binge watch some Netflix or something like that. We each respond to that in a different way. So how do you feel comforted when that's happening? How do you feel? What are the important people in your lives, right? The relationships. That constellation of people, those different combinations, changes over the course of our life. People come into our lives, people go out of our lives. There are people that are in our lives that we'd like to get closer to, and we'd like support for that. People in our lives where we're not as involved with, and that's just okay. But that can change over the course of a life. Also, the things that give us purpose and meaning. So if we're doing things that benefit other people, we're volunteering, that gives us a sense of purpose. People appreciate, I do this for other people. That's important to me. But also sometimes the things that we do give us status and control. Those are important too. What are the status things like? My job that I'm doing on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm responsible for aisle 3 at the bookstore. I work there. I make sure that the books are lined up, and I make sure it's all dusted, and I update my manager about what's there. I'm the manager of that section of the bookstore. So being a manager, having titles or sense of status and control, but also in family relationships, for example, I'm an uncle. I'm a grandfather. My role as a grandfather, my status as a grandfather means I have responsibilities. This is what we do in our family. Or I'm an uncle. This is what we do. And I'm an auntie. These are roles that I take in my family, and I'm proud of them. Also has to do with the rhythm and pace of life. So let's just look at it on a daily schedule. The pace of our days. Some of us are morning people. We wake up in the morning without an alarm clock, and our most productive hours are first thing in the morning. Other people, some of us are not that way, where we need the snooze alarm. If we have a particular time, we got to get up, and don't talk to me until I've had 2 cups of coffee. But I'm productive later on in the day. We are all different in that way. Making sure that a person is supported in a unique way that addresses that important too, and doesn't result in direct support staff who are morning people supporting people who are not morning people, right? We don't want to have that misalignment, but we also want to make sure that that's just part of their lifestyle. That's an important too. How do we celebrate the end of the week when it's Friday? How do we feel, thank goodness it's Friday? That means we go out with friends, or that means we get to do, some of the bike trails. I get more active. I do a lot of outside stuff on weekends. So that's part of the rhythm of the week. We have rhythms of the season, right? How do we really look back on a summer or look back on a winter and say, that was a good one because I did X, Y, and Z? Or if I'm going to have a vacation, some of us have experience where we have a time off and we go back to work and we say, that didn't feel like a vacation at all. Why? Because this didn't happen. I didn't get to go to Hampton Beach and put my feet in the water or lay on the sand for a period of time. So what are the things that need to happen in order for you to feel like you've experienced something? Those are things that are important too. The things we have that identify our space, that feel like it's ours, it might be our collections, right? It might be certain colors or certain images or photos. Those are important twos. And it's the things we have, the things we do, the people in our lives. All of these things are important. So you can see that a lot of those are really referenced in those HCBS rules that we talked about, right? Ensuring that these important twos are present in somebody's life. That needs to be there. We also need to know and learn from the person and other people who are important in their life, what's important for them. So what's important for each one of us is different. It's those things that we should do It's the things that we know that are on our list of we should do this, and relating to very often falls into these categories of health and safety. I know there are certain things that I should do that my doctor tells me, that I learn about when I go to my doctors. I should do the following things. I should exercise more. I should have a balanced diet. I should make sure I'm addressing any health conditions that I have right now. I should be taking certain medications. These are all important for us, unique to each one of us, that tend to be in the same category. But it's also one of those things that we often historically in our system have always plugged into our individual service agreements and our care plans. Historically, they've had to be at the top of the list, and we have to do them great, right? But important twos need to be present, both important to and important for, not one to the exclusion of the other, because that's an imbalanced life. If we only address the important twos, we may have a lot of fun, but if we're not taking care of our health and safety, we might not live long. We might not live long. If we're only doing important fours, it's a prescribed life. It's a controlled life. That's not a quality of life. So it has to be in balance. And we don't, all of us have a lingering list of important fours. We know we've got to do this. We know we have to do that. And we don't always address them in a dedicated way. It's good to have support in those things. So it's great to have other people in our lives that'll help us with that. But you know what's even better is if there's support in helping us understand and recognize there's a connection. If we address our important fours, when there's also a presence of important twos, they're more likely to be accomplished. So if I need to exercise more, if I'm doing that in connection with other people that are important to me, so there's social connections, that's important too, I'm more likely to do them, right? Also, if I'm realizing that if I address my important fours, it's going to give me more access to, if I exercise more, I'm going to be able to do more of those fun recreational things in the summer. So if there's a link and we're getting support and knowing what those links are, the important fours are more likely to be supported. So yes, they should be in the individual service agreement and care plan in a way that's customized and the person agrees with, because they're connected to the important twos in a way. We also really want to make sure that we understand important fours also fall into the category of the things that we can say we should do. We should make sure that we're not doing things that marginalize or ostracize ourselves from the rest of the community. So it's those things that ensure that we are not marginalized, that we are valued members of community. So if we are doing things that are breaking social rules, or we haven't learned those social rules, we need to learn them. That's something we should do. So we should learn that the way we dress when we go to the church service on Sundays is not the same way we dress on a Friday evening. When we are going to Dunkin' Donuts, even though we really like that cup of coffee and that donut that we always get on a Saturday, if there's a line, we wait at the end of the line. If we go at the front of the line, people are going to be wondering who this strange person is and why are they still coming to this coffee shop. So it's important for each one of us to understand and deal with and learn the skills and capacity to be a valuable member of a community. So we want to make sure that's happening. So we're looking at making connections in community, building relationships of belonging, right? It's important for a person to be supported so that they're present in community. It's important that a person is supported so that they are participating in community. They're not just tourists. They're not visiting the community, right? They're not doing community activities. They're actually part of. So that means building relationships based on shared gifts or talents. And one person who's done a lot of work on this sort of help us be creative and thinking about and capturing information about what's a person's gifts or talents. This is Beth Mount. Beth Mount has been doing this for many years, and she has some lovely ways of helping groups of people sort of dive into this and understand this. So she suggests thinking about it in a structured way of like, let's break it down. What is a person's gift of hand? What is a person's gift of head? What is a person's gift of heart? What is a person's gift through history and identity? So some gifts show up in the way people act, the things they do. Sometimes they just show up in response to just their presence with other people, right? Maybe their presence or engagement with family. Sometimes it's just being in places in which their gifts come alive. So we want to be thinking about what are some stories we know about the person where these things show up. So let's think about gifts of hand. Those are abilities and skills that a person can contribute, abilities and skills. So, for example, recognizing people, remembering names, dancing, singing, fixing things, drawing, arranging shapes and colors, right? Decorating, figuring out the best way to do a job, working hard in physical activity, or the ability to sign. These are all gifts of hand. Gifts of head, this is knowledge, questions, and experience and information, right? Those are things that the person can contribute that are called gifts of hand. So example, figuring people out, organizing things, classifying things, being a sports fan information, right? Gossip, local history, ability to spot a bargain, creative thinking, solving puzzles, these are all gifts of head. Gifts of heart, these are interests or enthusiasms or personal passions. And these show up in relationship or presence of other people, sensitivity to the others, high energy, a desire for order, the ability to be a good listener, love of nature, spiritual gifts, those are gifts of heart. And then finally, gifts of history. These are things that kind of experiences or knowledge or responsibilities that are often show up in the roles that somebody has in a family or traditional roles that show up in spiritual practice or traditional practices. So we can think about this as, one way to start in remembering a person's gifts is just to share a story about a time when the person really made a positive difference when they were with another person and they felt good about doing that. So it doesn't matter how big or small that difference might be, only how the person made a difference. So we reflect on that story and we reflect on it by asking what kind of gifts showed up in that story. So we want to note a phrase or a word that names that gift. So that's an inquiry process, a discovery process that we can use to really get at the bottom of this. So another way of thinking about what some of those gifts and talents or gifts of heart, head, and hand, history, is really thinking about, what are those moments that make your heart sing? We can tap into that for each other, right? But also the person who's the focus of our support as a case manager or service coordinator. What makes their heart sing? What do people like and admire about the person? We can start meetings actually, when you're doing getting together for the planning meeting, a service agreement or care plan is just starting to go around on the table. Let's all share what we like and admire about this person. That's a wonderful thing to hear, right? You certainly want to stay at a meeting where you're listening to that. And it's new and it's source of new information that can form a basis for all of the elements of the service agreement or planning meeting. But this is a way of sort of tapping into this key contributions and acknowledge and appreciate what the person's talents are. Another way to sort of tap into this broad kind of question, we want to be the why behind our service agreement or care plan is supporting somebody in pursuing their hopes and dreams. Hopes and dreams is a big category. And how do we tap into that? How do we unpack that? So one way to do that is just do some thought experiments or some pretend activities. What if I was Aladdin and you have 3 wishes? What would be your first wish? So what does the person answer regarding that question? It can be it's imagination, it's dreaming, right? I dream of being a race car driver, or I dream of living on a mansion on Cape Cod, right on the beach. So that's a dream, and it's a source of information. So see that as sort of a, okay, that's our starting point for discovery. What is it about being a race car driver that's important to you? What do you think that experience would be like? What would be happening? And then as you unfold that, as you look at different elements to it, you might find that there are pieces around status. There might be pieces around wearing a uniform or celebrations or excitement, adrenaline rush. So those are part of that imagined, desired future, right? And then the question is, what would it take to help the person get one step closer to that experience? Also, we can ask this question of, let's think about the world where there are no limitations, no financial limitations, no system rules or anything, and answer this question: if I could, I would do what? No holds barred. What would I do? Sometimes this is helpful for families who are working and supporting their loved one. And, it's the day-to-day struggle. You tend to live in this world of limitations, but having a moment to just say, if I could, I would do this. Now we can dive into what would it take for us to create support arrangements where you can get one step closer to that. And that becomes some next steps. That becomes some next outcomes and goals that you can plug into your service agreement. So we have to honor, we're listening, and we have to respect the person's dreams and support. One of the things we think about is person-centered practices in general, and also this process of discovery and exploration. It's all built on a foundation of trust, right? Which a relationship of trust that's built over time. And we say it in person-centered thinking that that relationship, person-centered practices are based on 3 promises. So it's that promise to listen. You're asking these questions, you're going to listen. The second promise is a promise to act on what you hear. So the person actually sees that, hey, you're listening to me, and the world changes a little bit. You're helping me move forward. The third promise is a promise to be honest. So not making up fake promises or saying that you can do things when you're not the right person. So an honest response in some situations, well, let's talk about the time it'll take to do that, or the resources that have to go into that. So that information is available, or I'm not the right person to do that, but I'll look for, or I think I know somebody who can help you with that. That's being honest, right? So 3 promises: to listen, act on what we hear, and to be honest. Then you can, over time, you'll find that as you're tapping into these kind of questions that capture hopes and dreams, if you hold that question over time, that relationship will expand over time, and you tap in. So having social roles that are seen as valued by others is really an important part of living a life that's engaged, a life of belonging. And so we want to intentionally and thoroughly look into all the possibilities and opportunities that might be there in all of the places the person might be. So they've spent some time that they go to. So we want to ask the person and explore the question of, what do you want to do there? What does the person want to do there? What kind of help might you want or need to do those things? Who can see or meet you there? Who will go with you? What role do you want support staff to provide? Maybe that's just transportation and then they back out. Maybe it's presence at certain times, but backing out at others. Also, how does the person want the support person to be represented or introduced? I'm his friend, I'm his driver, or I'm actually a staff person. The person decides how you were described. And also, stepping through this also requires that we're thinking about capturing places and helping a person be present in places where their skills and contribution appreciated, right? We want to make sure that we're supporting a person in a way that helps them to be connected. We're asking, what would be Where do people hang out who have the kind of skills and passions that you have? So relationships can be expanded. So as you're going through the process of updating an ISA or a care plan, you're thinking about three things that you're keeping in mind, right? One is that you probably have a standard packet, so you're updating that information. There's certain formats that you might use as a standard practice. You're getting new consent authorizations. There are elements to that, even though they might be standard packets. Take a look at the elements of them, make sure they're still relevant or in the language and form of communication that you want to make sure matches the person, right? Secondly, you're planning time to have those questions, those meaningful conversations, informal at first, but they become much more specific over time where you're capturing all that information, right? And you're acquiring updates on what's important to the person, what's important for them, what their strengths and talents and skills are as they're expanding, what their hopes and dreams are for the future, what their desires for next step activities are, and so on. You're also fundamentally, as you are updating an individual service agreement or care plan, it's really shaped around this question of what is working and how you're being supported now, what's making sense, and what's not working and not making sense. So you're working with the person in partnership to explore what's making sense that they like, that they would like to keep or have enhanced, what's not making sense, not working for them, that they would like to have stop, right, or change. So those are the two questions. The working, not working is a format, is a structured kind of consideration where you're asking each one of those questions. What's working for you? What's making sense for you? Usually in a specific area. So you've been living with this home provider for the last year. What's working for you with regard to that? What's making sense for you? And really collecting that information. And then also asking the question and holding the space for a careful and specific exploration of what's not working for you, what's not making sense, and really capturing that information and following through with those three promises, right? Listening, acting on what you can, and being honest. But you have a balanced kind of insight from the person. And then that helps you determine how you're going to partner with them to make changes in their service agreement or care plan. So as part of your workflow and building your person-centered planning process, you're assembling that packet, you're doing those working, not working conversations, you're having those meaningful conversations. And here are the kind of questions that should be part of all of those meaningful conversations, right? These are part of the elements of what you're also capturing in those engagements with the person. What do they want to learn? Are there new things they want to be able to do and learn? And how do they want to be supported in that learning? Who and when would that support? What are their hopes and dreams? What kind of work are they interested in? Everyone is capable of working and they're interested in providing customized support for different work experiences. What might those be for this person? Maybe they want to volunteer. What are those things? How does the person wish to be involved in their service planning meeting? So always checking on, we're working on this together. What are some of the things that you would like to do in your meeting? And how can I support you there? And what are the things you'd like me to do? A review of the changes over the past year can be beneficial during that pre-ISA and care planning process. These are some of the things that you're including, right? You're getting updates to each one of these areas: employment, health. Has anything changed? We all evolve in the way we communicate. We communicate in different ways. Is the person communicating in different ways? Is there new skill sets related to that, perhaps? What's changed in terms of their living situation, of their services or demographics in general since the last ISA meeting? What are their emergency contacts? Have that changed at all? So we mentioned before the importance of using person-centered practices and supporting people who may act in a way that's challenging or disturbing to others. It's just as important, or even more important, to think about person-centered ways of addressing that. So one practitioner who's been working at this for quite some time and has some great advice and has been consulting with different organizations and care teams is David Pitoniak. And what we have here on this slide is a list of 7 questions that he endorses. These are actually 7 questions that are recommended by John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien, 2 researchers and great practitioners and consultants around person-centered practices. David feels that these are important to be considering and making sure that we're really addressing with people who present ways of acting that are disturbing or challenging to others. But what he says is that his practice has really been based on a simple idea that difficult behaviors result from unmet needs. And in a sense, difficult behaviors are messages which can tell us important things about the person and the quality of his or her life. So in his experiences, people who have difficult behaviors are often missing some things. They're missing meaningful and enduring relationships. They're missing a sense of feeling safe or a sense of well-being in general. They're missing experiences of joy in ordinary and everyday places. They're missing power and choice in their life. They're missing a sense of value and self-worth. They're missing relevant skills or knowledge. And also, they're missing supporters who are well supported. It's not uncommon for those who are closest to and doing their best to support a person with difficult or challenging behaviors often are not well supported themselves. That's an unmet need that needs to be addressed in these situations. So David says that these needs are usually minimized or ignored in traditional ways of supporting someone, or they can get into a cycle of support that can lead to that. And as a result, people become relationship resistant. They become chronic rule breakers. They develop a sense of helplessness or insecurity. Depression and isolation happens. So David goes on to say that supporting a person requires us to get to know them as a complicated human being influenced by a complex personal history. And it's very tempting to react by creating a quick fix treatment plan, a behavior plan, right? That often tries to reduce those disturbing or challenging behaviors, and it really ends up attacking the person in a way that is disrespectful and counterproductive. So instead, David advises that we develop not a plan that fixes them, but one that helps the person and their supporters to think about these 7 questions and think about new ways of supporting to address their unmet needs. Before we finish, I'll have a reference to David's website. So the person chooses the planning, meeting, and location and timing, right? They identify when the meeting happens, where they're going to sit, where they'd like other people to sit. They might want to have a meeting where they're standing up, where they're sitting down. They might want to have a meeting where certain lighting is present or absent, music is playing. Determine how they would like to update or provide information at the meeting. Would they like to co-chair and move in and out of different roles as the meeting progresses? The door might be left open if the person needs to stand up and become active during the meeting or need to step out for a little bit. That flexibility is made available, right? All of those things are adjusted and customized in real time as the meeting is happening. And so we know that the person-centered planning gathering process really drives the ISA itself, right? So let's recap the steps. So you've had those conversations, the agenda and the setting is put together. People are invited according to who the person wants. Information is shared in a way that the person wants to share. They might want to have information shared as a way, most people don't want to just be reading bullet points, but if they want to share their experiences this last year with their home provider or with their last summer and update people in the team, maybe they want to do that as on a display instead of just presenting, where there's pictures of my last year or my last summer, what have you. This is what my life has been like. And people, as they come into the meeting, ask questions. So it's a question and answer kind of thing. They might want to have something presented that's a recording made over time when they are most comfortable sharing information about their life. And maybe that's done on an iPhone and put together. And in the meeting, people watch that simple recording. So there's different ways the person might want to share that information. You turn to them for that. That's a way of sharing what their accomplishments are, right? In a way that's comfortable with them. We know that the content includes of the ISA and or care plan, the strengths, preferences, dreams, and hopes, right? The strengths are skills and talents. The preferences are desired activities. Their best way of learning, so that's preferences are indicated there. What individualized and customized instruction really it entails. And also their dreams and hopes has that important too, present, right? And what matters most to them. The goals and objectives include references to their strength-based perspective. Also, it leverages, right? It builds on and leverages their existing unique skills and gifts. It's tied to their important twos. A balance of important two and four is showing up in the individual service agreement and care plan. There's instructions to staff. It's very specific. What is the specific way that the person learns best? How do they want to be supported in learning? The specificity around that is important. What is their best way to communicate? What is their preferred communication? What are the different ways and sources of information that we learn about preferences for the person? What yes means, what no means. And what are their hopes and dreams? It's all about quality of life as they define it. The person's definition of quality of life is captured in outcome statements, right? If they have an image of they would like to live in downtown in an apartment and they would like less staff in their life, right? That might be a vision of their future, right? Not always have staff hanging out. So if that's the case, what are some outcomes that are embedded in that preferred future? So these are some examples on this slide. It's different for every person, but let's say the person wants to live in an apartment on their own. One outcome that would be a component of that is preparing food independently. And the goals would build into that outcome. So in this case, on this slide, the goal would be making lunch. Now, there would be a very specific goal statement, operationally defined, very detailed information on when, where, and how that support is provided, how it's being recorded, how progress will be tracked, how progress will be evolved and updated based on evaluations, right? And when it will be revisited. So all of that is in there. But the goals associated with that outcome may be making lunch, preparing a simple snack, making toast. It could be any one of those components of that outcome. Also, we've talked about initially in this training how HCBS or Home and Community-Based Services Medicaid funding supports our system of care. But those rules are very specific, right? To sustain that ongoing funding, we have to document the delivery of services. So our documentation is very specific. We learn what those are. They are specific methods of writing things down and making sure that's permanent and available for review later. So it's a documentation, proof of service delivered. But we also want to think about this through a person-centered practices lens and think about how that documentation can also serve the purpose of customizing and individualizing services, right? In real time. So we're collecting information about what happens on what day, what time, who's present, what actually is happening, but adding information So during that experience of support, what happened that the person liked, that they would like to have continued? What happened that the person didn't like, that didn't work out, doesn't make sense, and they would like to have stopped or we should do differently? Collecting that on an ongoing basis builds our knowledge so that we can evolve and customize support over time. And that can happen while support is being provided. So in person-centered thinking, we think about that tracking method as a learning log, a way of not only documenting that service has been delivered, but documenting information in which we can update our knowledge. We can learn more and more over time of how the person wants to be supported, what's the best way they learn, what's their preferences are, and how we can evolve and make sure that their experiences are positive and they're having more good days than bad days. So these are some of the policies and regulations that have been updated to be in alignment with the new settings rule, the federal requirements. So there's the HCBS waiver and codes of administrative rules and the specific regulations. There's also the state plan on aging goals, which really reference and reflect some of those new HCBS rules. So all in all, what we want to think about as case managers and service coordinators, that we're champions for the person. The plan that you've helped create with them shows everyone what matters most to them. It honors their personal preferences, and it helps them chase their dreams. A good plan helps ensure that they'll be supported to make their own decisions and choices. A good plan helps them to say yes to what they want and no to what they don't want. So these are some references that I promised you, some information on, there's David Pitoniak's website. Also, the Learning Community for Person-Centered Practices is it's an international learning community. It's a voluntary group of people who get together and perfect their practices on person-centered thinking. And that's some great sources of information. John O'Brien and Connie Lyle O'Brien have a great website there that's called inclusion.com. And finally, the Administration for Community Living has a website that provides some great reference material on that new HCBS rule, those latest rules, and other ways of learning about it. So thank you very much. Appreciate you participating in this training. Take care.